Hi, everybody. This is loud. We're going to welcome our panelists. So, welcome to the DeFi panel at Split. And we're missing one person amongst us? No, just myself. So, dobro dan, everybody. Hello. And this is the third edition of Blog Split. And we were all here on the first one. I'm Fauve Altman, I'll be the moderator. I work with Full Ventures, my own venture, but I work with a specific DeFi project, which is Ref Finance. It's the near-native AMM index, and I will pass the microphone to let our panelists present themselves and their companies.
Hi everyone, my name is Gaspard Peduzzi. I'm one of the co-founder and the protocol lead at AP1. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Zaki. I am the co-founder of Sommelier Finance.
Hi there, I'm Valentin, co-founder of Tesseract, and I also manage a small DeFi fund, centralized.
I could have done that, actually. So now I'm going to deep dive with each one of you before we get into the very specific fireside chat questions. So I would love to have you give us a bit of an overview of the evolution of DeFi in your own perspective, and why did you choose to work in DeFi or co-found a company in DeFi, specifically in the blockchain space?
Yeah, very interesting question. So one thing that really captivated my interest in DeFi and actually the protocol that we're building is focusing on interest rate. So we've seen quite some evolution on interest rate going from non-organic liquidity mining to different kind of revenue models and just layers of protocol there. And so in 2020, after the DeFi summer, that's where we, with a couple of friends, all from a computer science background, we decided to build derivatives on interest rate to be able to create an explicit market for yield.
So I've been working on building layer one blockchains for many years, since about 2015. And I think the thing that most of us who were building layer one blockchains back then imagined what blockchains would be used for is what we have started to call DeFi. So it's been long the dream, I think, of people who are building blockchains to like create a platform in which you had these like open settlement layers that anyone could use. One of the things that I think has been was the motivation behind building Sommelier, which is a sort of decentralized strategy manager. It's a decentralized execution environment that can execute like an actively managed strategy on behalf of a set of users through a vault interface. And we have a workshop on how to build sellers that's right after this talk on the 3rd floor. So, sellers are what we call our strategies. But the reason I've been working on Sommelier is DeFi, we saw this enormous promise in 2020 where people who were not traditional actors in finance, were not funds, were not market makers, were actually, performing sort of what were traditionally sort of gate-kept, intermediated roles in finance, like being liquidity providers on a DEX. But now we're starting to see this migration towards like the sort of, as protocols become more complex, they become harder for users to like understand the implications of participating in DeFi. It becomes more difficult to manage risk. It becomes more difficult to manage a complex position. And what Sommelier is doing is providing a non-custodial layer where you can actually get the benefit of a strategist who's actually automating a lot of this risk management for you. And that's why Sommelier exists, because we are trying to keep the DeFi dream alive of disintermediated finance.
So for me, in one sentence, it could be said that I came for the money and I stayed for the tech. In 2020, there were all these nice yield farming opportunities, and this is how I got involved. But then I figured out that actually DeFi is a very efficient system, much more efficient than the current one. And the reason for that is that current banks, they have a lot of overhead. They need to hire people, they need to have offices and all that. So if they provide services, most of the cash flow goes to them and not to their users. With the DeFi, it's different. Most of the cash flow goes to the users. And I think this is a much fair system, much more efficient. So I would say that DeFi is pretty much like the future of finance and how things should be built going forward.
With what all of our speakers just said, in 2022, there's been a lot of new trends in the Web3 ecosystem, and specifically in DeFi, which is what, with the layer 1s, layer 2s, is cross-chain solutions, liquidity aggregation across different networks. So my question to all of you is, how do you approach risk management between the networks? As we know, bridges offer the biggest threats in terms of hacks.
I would say as a project founder, we try to be conservative, not too much in the race of going on a network each time there is a new one. But at the same time, DeFi and crypto in general is also a fail-fast space where eventually you want to let the people the choice of addressing their needs with different kind of networks as well, eventually at the risk of getting their end burned in the process. So that being said, I think it is important to be cautious because things grow fast, and then when things are big, they can explode easily as well.
So I've always viewed interoperability as essential for the success of DeFi. Like the simplest way to think about it is that the lowest cost of any transaction will always be the smallest profitable arbitrage on a platform. So unless you have multiple domains, multiple like chains that are communicating, where different DeFi activities and different user experiences are achieved, you aren't able to like sort of arbitrage and structure the design of a user experience or a product to sort of take advantage of the fact that like, hey, you don't have to have a DEX on every single platform. Not every place needs to have like large liquid arbitrage. Not every place needs to have liquidations occurring, but you want to have interoperability between these different domains. And so I do think that like product market fit for DeFi rests entirely on multi-chain solutions. Sommelier is a multi-chain solution. I've been working for many years on Cosmos and Cosmos IBC, also a multi-chain solution. I think part of the challenge that we have is that like sort of in these early days of DeFi, we've had this rush to build bridges because all of these changes were getting started. And so what in 2014 was, in sort of 2014 to 2018, you needed exchange listings in order to be like sort of a credible project. In 2021 and 2022, it became that you need to have a bridge in order to be a credible project. But unlike where Cosmos has spent 5 years working on a bridging protocol that we are pretty confident in its robustness, you see a lot of these bridging protocols were built in much less time by much smaller teams. And now, they represent like one of the biggest sources of systemic risk in our industry. So what I'm expecting is I expect bridging and interop technology to continue to mature. And I think we will, just like in 2014, exchange hacks were very common. I think in 2022, bridge hacks will be very common, but the industry will mature.
So when evaluating opportunities, because it comes down to, okay, I see like 20% APY, should I ape in? I think it's very important to know where the yield is coming from. So for example, with the UST, like it's subsidized and all that, it's very important to know how the whole system works, like what are the incentives and like what are the economic risks. Like in the UNA's case, like with this algorithmic stablecoin, like with minting when doing redemptions and all that, you need to be familiar with that. So you see the APY that's just on the surface. You need to know what's happening underneath. It helps a lot if you have technical background to evaluate the smart contracts. That helps ridiculously a lot. So it's a huge edge. It was the best edge in 2020. Right now, I would say Lindy effect is very important. So for how long a given bridge has been around, that's super important. Also, I consider everything that is not EVM to be more risky because it hasn't went through all the hacks that happened with EVM contracts. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. I personally avoid anything that is not EVM. I think all these things should be taken in consideration, because there is no easy money in the current market. That's what I can tell you. So if there is an exceptional API somewhere, do your research and see where it's coming from, because there is a high chance it involves huge amounts of risk somewhere in the system.
Thank you. We're going to keep passing around the microphone to be a united front. So in terms of, do your own research and do not ape in high APYs and be wary of it and have a technical background. Sure, I'm not a developer. I have no technical background, but I work with developers. I get to be educated by the core teams. But for your users who are not developers, who are not hardcore crypto people, and they see, oh man, I can make 200% APY on my savings account, for example, but if I go into crypto, and this is what we call now is yield farming, and yield farming is our hype in DeFi at the moment. But yield farming is not sustainable, is not a sustainable model as we hear it, but there is forms of yield farmings that are sustainable, which work much closer to or a traditional savings account, just on crypto, more access to your funds. But how do you counter the negative connotations of yield farming by being a DeFi protocol yourself?
I think that's a very relevant point, because we see the space evolving quite fast on those models. That being said, I think we moved away from the compound liquidity mining initially that we had with just positive interest, even if you're borrowing. But at the same time, we have protocols that are doing more or less liquidity mining or just incentives, but that found a model where they are not just diluting too much, and it's not just inflation for the short-term benefit. And I think, for example, Curve model did a great job about providing a model where you manage to have a complete system, so just not one end throwing money at pools, bringing liquidity, and eventually, 6 months pass and you have nothing to give. So I think there are new models there. I think the question is also, where are you throwing the incentives as well? Just random liquidity mining doesn't necessarily make sense. It's just not about the liquidity, but it's about if the liquidity is necessary. I mean, the gauges there were interesting for that as well. But I think we have to evolve more in that perspective as well. If you are to provide incentives, then who are you giving the incentives to, and how? And that's also a relevant question, and just not necessarily liquid tokens that can be dumped the second that they are given. So yeah, I think we see different kind of experiments. The common ground is that you cannot plan the future, so you don't know what will be the good solution in 2-3 years. But you have to be conservative enough to be able to be there in 2-3 years. And then it's a matter of how the market is arbitraging one solution against the other. And I think there are quite some interesting experiments, but they are still experiments, even though, again, some models like Curve were there for quite some time.
So I think there's a couple of things. One is, I do think that liquidity mining remains an essential tool for the development of the DeFi-like space. You have to compensate people for putting funds, locking funds into new smart contracts, risky smart contracts, new protocols, etc. And it is a huge part of protocol go-to-market to have sort of the magnitude of the yield farming is often strongly coupled with the amount of novelty in user experience, amount of novelty in smart contracts, etc. But I think that there's a lot of things in this ecosystem are to a certain extent yield farming for yield farming's sake, where you have where the protocol itself is not very novel. Maybe it's deployed on a new chain. You've got every Sushi Swap and Uniswap sort of forked onto many different chains. each one of them has a token that's like doing liquidity mining on that chain, but all you're really doing, like there's not that much new risk associated with the smart contract itself. All you're doing is trying to attract users onto this new environment. And that's unlikely to be that net value creative. Like if yield farming is sort of ends up validating that like a new set of technical primitives work, then it can be like hugely value creating. If all it does is just extract move capital from like one place to another place, seeking yields, but doesn't actually like give birth to like new battle-tested open source infrastructure, then yield farming is largely wasted.
So yield farming, I agree here. It's very important to bootstrap these protocols. So in order to have a working DEX, you need to have liquidity into it. So you need to somehow attract that. So when you have liquidity, then you have swaps happening, then you can collect fees. So it's a kind of a chicken and egg problem. In order to have fees, you need liquidity. To have liquidity, you need fees. So yield farming is the way to break this chicken and egg problem. Now, in the long term, what should happen, and it's already happening with certain protocols, is that instead of relying on liquidity mining, you need to have some real business going on. So you need to have cash flow. And we already see that with protocols like Curve and Sushi and Uniswap and all that. So liquidity mining is important when you bootstrap your protocol, and I think it's probably going to be used in the future, especially with these innovative models like Olympus Pro, for example, which is a very interesting model in my opinion. But yeah, in the long run, projects that could not establish their product market fit and start collecting sizable amount of cash flow that is somehow targeted towards their token to sustain its price, then their token is going to go down to zero. Because what happens is that all the liquidity miners, all the yield farmers are just going to farm it and dump it. So in order to be sustainable, you need to have real business. And as we mature, it's going to be clear which projects manage to build a real business and which experiments just are going to fail.
The only other thing I would say is I feel like that a lot of protocols have not kept enough sort of dry powder. They decided that they are going to liquidity mine like one set of user behaviors, and then have committed to doing that over the course of years, when it's not really clear whether or not in year 2 of the project you should be liquidity mining the same set of users behaviors as you were liquidity mining in the first year.
Thank you. So bear market, right? And Terra, Luna, what happened? Everybody getting wrecked and going down. Debt management. How do you handle debt management of your users on your protocol and the strategies behind it? Or is it because it's decentralization, it's decentralized protocols, do your own research, users didn't know how to work on the platform, their problem, but it's also the messaging on your product. So how do you work between both of messaging it right, but also offering strategies around debt management for low markets?
So messaging it right is one of the biggest issues I think that we have in DeFi and crypto in general. Yesterday on a panel we were discussing about what skills were missing or complicated to find in DeFi, and then those were pretty much marketing, UX, that kind of issues. And I think the common issue is that the DeFi users is not necessarily knowledgeable, doesn't have technical knowledge as well, and need to basically deal with that in a way. And you as a product builder, as a protocol builder as well, you need to adapt to that, but without losing in efficiency, without giving up complexity that can be profiting for the user at the end, to the profit of simplicity and TVL in the short term. So I think that's a problem that we're currently dealing with and that we're trying to evolve and still figuring out how to tackle as well. But I would say it's a matter of layers as well, and it's not do your own research, it's also being able to interact with the right people or protocol that can be built on top and then offer the solution in a more easy way for the user as well. And then the messaging becomes more easy as well for them. So in general, you need to be transparent. You need to give the documentation, the explanation, the education. But I don't think there is one good particular way of handling that specifically.
So for the first strategies that we're launching on top of Sommelier, we've really focused primarily on optimizing the deposit side rather than offering something that takes on liquidation risk. That being said, it's unlikely that the protocol will generate sufficient cash flows to sustain itself if we don't have sort of leverage strategies on top of the platform where strategies are going to have to manage liquidation risk on behalf of the users, and there's a much higher risk of loss than we have in this sort of inertial strategy that we're launching. And so what we're taking is a strategy of we want to see like the whole platform stack mature before we start seeing these sort of leverage strategies emerge on top of Sommelier. But that is the direction that I think we will inevitably have to go, and the key thing that I think is important to understand is that like as you are experiencing as DeFi moves out of into all of these novel environments, roll-ups, cross-chain, non-EVM environments, Cosmos, IBC, all of these things, you're going to start seeing leverage and liquidations, asset-backed lending, emerging in all kinds of new environments. And it really took most of 2020 for that environment to mature in just the sort of EVM ecosystem, and we're going to go through a similar cycle. So the yields that you're going to be getting from moving into these multi-chain environments are going to be in many ways compensating you for the risk of we don't know how all of these liquidation systems are going to perform. So it's just an important thing to keep in mind. The strategy Sommelier is taking is we are launching our initial strategy is designed to avoid this and other kinds of risks, just to allow the platform to mature and for the entire ecosystem of like strategists and providers, and learn more at the workshop and learn more from my talk tomorrow. But all of this different ecosystem to mature before we sort of start battle testing it under the condition where there's like time-sensitive liquidations and capital allocation decisions that have to be made.
So if you're developing a DeFi protocol, you need to keep in mind that people are going to ape if they see a high APY, even if you put warnings all over the screen. So I think the right approach is to always take the least risky approach first. So implement the less risky strategies first. Avoid leverage at all costs. Because with leverage, it's not only smart contract risk, but especially if you're working on a layer 2 or some new blockchain, what could happen is that blockchain could stop. Like we've seen that with Solana and other chains. And then suddenly you can't have your liquidations or repayments going on. And when the blockchain comes back online, everyone gets liquidated. So such kind of things happen, and because these blockchains are being developed right now. So I think if you really need to have more higher risk strategies implemented in your system, and this is what we do at Tesseract, is put a certain limit on the amount of deposits that people can make. This way you can limit the amount of damage that could actually happen in case of some extraordinary circumstances. So I would say that take it easy, take less risk initially, and as the system matures, try to take more and more risk as the time goes.
Thank you. We're going to open up soon to the floor, but first, one last question or two to you three. Everyone is excited about jumping in DeFi from Web 2 to Web 3, more and more so. So, any alpha leaks you can share to us about your project, what's happening down the line, what's up next in the next few months or next few days? As we know, crypto moves extremely fast, 24-hour market. There's always something new every day. Give us some alpha leaks.
It's actually maybe linked to the last question. I think, like we pretty much talked about the risk of, the risk of aping, the reasoning, the critical thinking that you need to have when you say APIs, that kind of thing. And we've been focusing on building tools on both value exchange and information exchange about basically for one protocol, for one very big actor, so just a simple user understanding what are the risks associated with what he's doing. What will be the yield tomorrow? What can be the yield tomorrow? What is he actually doing as a user in DeFi? That's like our core focus, and we have a lot of both products and things that we're building currently for the next year that are exactly addressing that issue, because we think that eventually it will actually make the space more transparent, and transparency is not just smart contract because we don't all read code. So it's that kind of thing that will make the space more transparent and more safe for the user, that can be more informed, and that can be and for the protocols and those APIs and those risks that are not necessarily explicit, they will be able to be arbitraged as well on that aspect.
So Sommelier, the current state of the project is the strategy platform. The protocol upgrades have all been deployed and are live. We have our initial set of smart contracts that we are working through the issues with the auditors and probably launching in the next 2 weeks. And we will be offering, not insane APYs, but there will be liquidity mining to encourage people to try out this new platform. There will also be there are also going to be limits on deposits, as Valentin suggested. So, we encourage you to try out. We encourage, if you have a lot of experience trading or building smart contracts with DeFi, we are looking for strategists, and so there's a lot of opportunities there.
So, from a yield farmer's perspective, and like Tesseract is like a yield farming protocol and all that, I can say that right now the state of the market is that probably you should expect around 8 to 10% APY on your stables. So anything that is above that most probably is carrying a substantial amount of risk. So you need to be researching where is this risk coming from. If you really want like fire and forget, maybe it's going to be even lower than that. For crypto, like Ethereum and Bitcoin, if you want to get yield on top of that, usually it's going to be lower. The best case probably is just to collateralize your crypto, take a stable coin loan, and just farm with that. I think like these two strategies are probably the least risky one and the ones that should keep your funds safe for now.
Thank you. Well, it's at the end, at the moment of the fireside chat. I have tons of questions, obviously, as always, but I'd like to open the floor to a Q&A from the audience. I believe we have 2 microphones in the audience, and please feel free to direct your questions to whomever you'd like and ask any question.
Yes, you had spoken in the middle, I'm sorry, about liquidity mining different types of user behavior, like year 1 versus year 2. Could you give a bit more specific examples of what type of user behavior that would be and how that would look? So,
like, give you a couple of different examples. One is, the whole Curve sort of liquidity mining experience, right? So, Curve launched this liquidity mining program to encourage people to LP. Then they encouraged a whole bunch of other complex user behaviors around locking up tokens for governance. And so, to a large extent, so first you had encouraging people to just provide liquidity onto the platform. Then they moved to this model of encouraging people to sort of take the governance tokens and actually deploy them, use them in various ways. So we've seen a lot of user behavior experimentation from Curve, but right now there's still quite a lot of liquidity mining going on, but there's actually a lot less novel experimentation around different user behaviors. I mean, the same thing was true with the launch of IBC and Cosmos. where like osmosis is like massive user incentives were a huge reason for people to like learn to use Kepler, learn to onboard into the Cosmos system, adopt new wallets, all of those things. And sort of the activation energy of like adopting a new wallet, coming to a new chain, learning a new ecosystem, sort of justifies a very large amount of liquidity mining. Osmosis is having its third inning soon, but they're also becoming much more of a DeFi platform rather than just a DEX. And so you're going to start, I suspect you're going to start seeing a lot of the liquidity mining both decrease in its magnitude, because like the task of onboarding people into this ecosystem is largely sort of reached at least a sort of stable point. And now you're, instead of just incentivizing participating in just the DEX ecosystem, I think you're going to start seeing more incentives going towards other DeFi applications built on top of the platform. And so I think Osmosis is doing a good job of like tying like changing user behaviors to where the incentives are flowing, and updating the user behaviors as like you move through different periods of incentivization. Sommelier is also taken this strategy of, we've reserved a large amount of the token supply for various incentives, for seller strategists, for liquidity mining of seller users, but we haven't really committed inherently to like, oh, like we're going to just be liquidity mining this user behavior. We're going to take a very relatively small amount of the supply, incentivize the initial liquidity providers on sellers, demonstrate that the platform works, and then we're going to continue to figure it out over time, rather than take this model of, hey, like we know what we want to do, we know what we're going to incentivize, we're going to commit like half of our token supply to those incentives, and come what may.
Yeah, I think this summarizes it best. Like, I don't have anything to add here.
Cool. You looked like you wanted to say something.
Any more questions in the audience?
Hi, hello. This is for the three of them, that I think they could have different opinions on the topic. Because when we talk about yield farming, we actually talk about taking profit, and there are other strategies to take profit from the blockchain. One of them is MEV extraction. What do you think about MEV extraction in this cross-chain and multi-chain new paradigm?
I think it's one of the things where like it was still available for a long time, but it took quite some time to get arbitraged. And it's one of the things where, if you think about a multi-chain environment, in terms of liquidity movements or just all the potential arbitrage, it's still a lot of potential at the moment. And I think it's also one of the lower layer where we will see maybe a little bit more research on, given that, and it's like a little bit always working like that in cycles, something is working, like liquidity mining, everyone is doing the same thing, and eventually someone else look at the bigger picture and see that there are a lot of potential, lots of value that is not captured, and then I think MEV extraction is definitely right in this subject. So yeah, definitely something that I think we will see much more actors, much bigger actors also doing and focusing on, just to achieve just maximal value efficiency.
So MEV is like my favorite topic in blockchains. I think it represents like the big unsolved question about whether or not, in general, like blockchains in the long run will be good financial platforms. If we can manage things like user harmful MEV, we can keep access to MEV democratized. We don't fall into this world where like Jump makes all of the blocks on all of the chains. Like we will really have built something very valuable for humanity. So in general, I think we have to fight the MEV wars. I think I'm generally excited to see more people writing, I think that like without seeing MEV extraction in the world, it's really hard for protocol designers to optimize. I think the other big story story and value driver over the next couple of years is going to be MEV extraction that exists by coordinating behavior across chains.
So I'm going to have a talk about MEV tomorrow morning, and yeah, if you, I encourage you to come, because I think MEV is a factor I won't say it's a problem, because in my opinion it's a factor. It's both good and bad, but it's something that really can't be avoided, and it leads to certain very important incentives. And these incentives can make it or break it for the whole ecosystem. It's literally the one factor that could decide a lot of things. Now, when it comes down to cross-chain MEV, what happens is that it actually incentivizes centralization. Why is that happening? If you have Arbitrum and Optimism, for example, and there is a certain arbitrage between them, you're incentivized to control both sequencers, because that's going to allow you to capture this arbitrage without taking any risk. So in the long run, all these operators, they're going to be incentivized to collude together so they can extract this arbitrage. So we need to keep this in mind and figure out how to actually prevent this, or how to optimize for this. Because ultimately, it leads us to an end result of all sequencers and everything becoming centralized. So it's definitely a very important factor that needs to be taken in mind.
Thank you.
I believe we had another question in the audience. No more questions? Perfect. So I'll ask another question. So I'd like to ask between you three, as Valentin, you said that EVM compatible is the most secure. Do you two agree?
So, different point. No, but I would say, again, as a project builder, you need to be cautious about different things, and you like when there is something that have been tested a lot. You like standardization, you like that kind of thing, because you don't necessarily want to experiment and experiment in water too much. That being said, I don't like having a fixed opinion on those, so I would prefer see some people and trying, failing, and not failing, and then eventually I would change my mind depending on this aspect as well. That's not a very big opinion, but that's just a way of thinking.
So the EVM is absolutely punishing for smart contract developers. On the other hand, we do have bits and pieces of code now and pieces of the infrastructure that are really well understood. So like how to construct a liquidation engine on the EVM is like a really well understood thing. Whereas how to construct an EVM, a liquidation engine on a non-EVM platform is much less understood. On the other hand, I think you can build, like, the EVM has a ceiling on like the quality of the user experiences, the quality of the financial constructs that can be built, the number and diversity, the composability of those financial constructs. So I don't think that the EVM is like kind of the local or global optima. I think that there is a transitory phase, but I think as a user, so like almost like I would say that the EVM is maybe higher risk for developers and lower risk for users. If I were to like define, like developers who are trying to innovate are going to be continuously punished by the EVM, and they might find greener fields outside of the EVM. But for users, you are taking on risks that involve like sort of novel ecosystems where there's like a less evolved like auditing ecosystem, the security vulnerabilities are less well understood. And so there's going to be, and there's a smaller developer base that like sort of deeply understands the issues.
Yeah, what I just want to add is that here it's very important that we have degens that are willing to try these new systems. So they're willing to risk their capital and maybe lose it and all that. So that's very important because all these alternative systems, they're going to become more secure as more money are deployed to them, risked on them, lost on them. And so as we lose money, we understand where the problems are, we fix them, and we move on. So thanks to all the degens, and thanks to them, we're going to have better systems.
Indeed. Thank you for the degens.
Well, the DGens are just like our live bug bounty program, right? They help us debug and test the protocol. On this note, this is the end of the panel, and I believe that some of our speakers already spoke or have speaking sessions. Be sure to attend and give them some support.
Workshop on the 3rd floor, like right after this.
Go to the workshop. And I will be presenting tomorrow around the era of bridges at 3:30 p.m., but it's not the bridge that you think in terms of the developer content. It's around the soft skills side of bridging your product to your users to your product, and all the factors to take into consideration, which is not just the hardcore tech. You also need to think about people. On this note, give a warm thank you to our panelists, and thanks for listening in.